Guten Abend.
Guten Abend.
Wie geht's Ihnen?
Oh, mir geht es gut. Wie geht es Ihnen denn?
Good, danke.
Sehr schön.
Can we speak English now?
Okay, so that's the extent of German we're gonna hear here.
Also, ich möchte ein Frühstück, bitte. Und ein Durften. I can do that as well.
Okay, but a little bit of French in there, because that's the kind of breakfast you want.
Exactly.
So, hello and welcome to Rocket Beans TV. A little bit unusual for most people who are watching, but not unusual for the people who are watching for a longer time here. We're doing this in English today because I have the big honor, once again, to have the great Charles Cecil here at my side. Accept the compliments. So.
No, thank you. And it's a real pleasure. I'm a huge fan of Rocket Beans and Game 2. I'm old enough to remember coming, of course, to Giga Games as well, and as the spiritual successor, I think it's fantastic. I really admire, your organization.
Yeah, thank you very much. You can see maybe it's kind of a remake of old television, what we're doing here.
Exactly.
So just to feed it into, we had over the years, because as the people may know who are watching the stuff I'm doing here, I'm a big fan of adventure games, point and click games, and especially we had the opportunity to sit here for Broken Sword 5 many years ago. During the pandemic, I got an early look at Beyond the Steel Sky, which was also pretty fun to revisit that world. And now we're having the opportunity, with your team are working on the remake of one of the biggest adventure classics, in my opinion. The one that I played in my formative years. It's called BAPHOMET'S FLUCH in German, but the first Broken Sword is coming back.
It is indeed. Can I show you?
Yeah, please.
Lovely. So I'm very proud of BAPHOMET'S FLUCH, and we were very lucky that our publisher, Virgin Interactive, really cared about the localization, and I think they did a superb job on the German, and we're very lucky we still benefit from that. The original game, and when I show you, we'll be able to jump between the old and the new. And a lot of people will look at it and they'll go, I remember this. But it's quite shocking, the difference, because back in the day, it was 256 color. We had to feed off a single speed CD, which meant that our cutscenes were hugely compressed, and that caused artifacting and very jerky scrolling. So it's completely different. So may I start by just showing you where we are now in terms of the intro, and talk about and then I can talk you through the first sections of the game and what our ambitions are.
Yeah, please, show me, and then I have already a couple of questions.
Fantastic.
Paris im Herbst, die letzten Monate des Jahres und das Ende des Jahrtausends. Die Stadt ist für mich mit vielen Erinnerungen verbunden. Erinnerungen an Cafés, an Musik, an Liebe und an Tod.
So this is the old Revolution logo that morphs into the new one, and this is very much the intention that we're going from the old. We have a complete respect for the old. We're using that as the basis, and fans will remember this. But hopefully, this is a game, as I'll explain, written for anybody. So hopefully, people who've never played a point and click will feel that it is a welcoming game. So here we are. The original game, of course, was static. If you compare the screens, it's just so different. And of course, we have a little bit of animation, just because here is our example. This is our excuse to bring in the credits. An iconic Eiffel Tower, of course, a statement of intent. This is where we are. We're in Paris, and this is where most of the game is set. And I remember when I was probably 12, 13. My mother bringing me to Paris for the first time, and I plucked up the courage to ask a gendarme, excusez-moi, où est la toilette? It took me about 15 minutes, and so this is really my memory of Paris from when I was a very young child, particularly since England was very grim and grey and poor, and everything in Paris felt so exotic, and it was exotic.
So the impressions you get, it's interesting. This all brings nostalgia back of playing the game.
Yes,
back then,
exactly.
For me, especially.
So you can see what we've done here is we've gone from 640, 400 to 4K. Effectively, we've we've expanded it 6 times, so it's 36 times the resolution.
So it's also with the aspect ratio that is expanded, or is it cut?
We also have for the game screens, what we've worked very hard to do is to keep as much of the game screen as possible. So we fit within the aspect ratio wherever possible. So for those who don't know the original BAPHOMET'S FLUCH, here's our hero, George, who is sitting in a cafe and is almost killed by a bomb that blows him up and ultimately assassinates a man that we're about to see. So here we are, and what's lovely for fans of the game, they go, oh, I remember this is how it looked like. But one of the features that we have in the game is to be able to jump between the two. And this is how it really looked, which is really fun, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's always the impression what you have in your head and what it's really there. So
if we compare the difference, and as I said, we did do a director's cut, which was a re-implementation. This is going back to the original game, so all of the animations, all of the hotspots are included. So it is a point-and-click game, of course, and we try to reward the player through animations. So here, just simply the picking up a newspaper and reading it. And if we then come back, you can see, I hope that we've been true to the character. Obviously, in this low resolution, you don't see the eyes, you don't see, very much. Whereas, when George looks up, we can see the expression. It makes a huge, huge difference.
So you were able to put more animations in the newer one, or were you on top of the old ones?
We're generally redrawing the original animations. I do hope to put some new ones in, but at the same time, well, let me show you when I come in here. I will justify any changes. Now, also, if you don't mind me saying, this is still very much work in progress. So there are some things that look a little bit clunky, so forgive me for that. But one of the important things I'd like to show is that George has a light rim, and he also has a dynamic shadow.
Yeah, that's what I saw with the shadow. How does it look? It's the old one, so it's dynamically the more far away you are from the light, it gets dimmer. So it's not there in the original.
No shadow at all. So this is being dynamically lit, which obviously, and then when I go over for a hotspot, one of the things that I'm super keen on is that this feels like it feels contemporary for a modern audience. So instead of just moving the cursor around as you would have done traditionally, what we want to do is we want to make it easy. We want to put a label on there. We want to have the animated icons. You can see that as I come to maybe here, that it's quite clear that we're locked on until you move to a certain direction. So there's a sort of tactility to the interface if we now interact with this guy.
Ich versuche seinem Blick auszuweichen.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. So a lot of the older games, of course, necessitated by the technical limitations. This is what you can do in animations. I always thought the first Broken Sword was exceptional in animation, but like with hotspots and looking for the littlest items, it can get a bit difficult with older games.
It can, and I'm going to show you in a minute when we go to the next section. What we also try to do, this is the story mode, and the story mode is all about trying to make it as accessible as possible without dumbing it down. So, for example, what I'll show you is how we plan to do that. I particularly love this character, Chantal. I just have an affection for her. So, so if we can just sit through some of this conversation, hopefully it's fun.
Es war eigentlich eine sehr unschuldige Frage, aber ich konnte Ihre Vorbehalte fühlen. Das ist etwas, mit dem irgendwie alle Europäer zu kämpfen haben. Sie sehen aus, als könnten Sie ein bisschen Hilfe gebrauchen.
Ich könnte einen Drink gebrauchen.
Very smoky voice.
Yes. Well, the original Nico, Francesca, yes, she was Francesca, wasn't she? Was terrific, wasn't she? She was the voice of Gillian Anderson, of course.
Yes.
And it's interesting because obviously in the UK, we don't dub, we subtitle, but we don't dub. So this concept of an actor playing the part, it was completely new to me.
Ja, bin ich. Ich habe unter Dougie Hauser studiert.
Now, what we want is we want people to listen to all of the dialogue, but we do feel that it's reasonable. So instead of just clicking, which is so easy, you can double click to go through the dialogue. Which obviously, in a walkthrough like this, we don't have too much dialogue. So she asks for a drink, and it's a bottle of vodka. Sorry, it's a bottle of brandy. I beg her pardon.
Das ist besser.
Sie schüttet
Remade vodka.
Yeah. Great. Now, this is a cheaty version because I've given myself the object that I need so that I can show you the game much quicker, so we don't need to go through too much dialogue. So let me just follow this and we'll go through.
So even with the story mode, as you said, you still have to look for the items and do this to have a
the game
similar
is exactly
experience.
the same. So let me take you in. Oh, sorry. Let me also show you in here. Now, if for people who remember this first, they might see that this is different. Now, I will justify any changes that we make. The reason that I wanted to change this one is that in the intro, you see the clown planting a bomb on a stool there. Now, in the original, the stool is standing as if nothing had happened.
All right, yeah.
And actually, it looks like the bomb went off here, which is not make sense. So it helps the storytelling by changing elements that address problems with the continuity. So,
was it something that you had to back of your mind when the game came out?
Well, let me
the
show
placement
you,
of the bomb.
Let me. That was one, but let me tell you something that's worried me for 30 years. Okay, so we're going to come across here. Notice also the way that we have, super smooth scrolling now. Obviously, the original is much more jerky. But when we come in here, and this worried me at the time, and finally I'm able to solve it. It's absolutely brilliant. When George comes in here, notice also dynamic shadow. He has a go at the pulls at the drain pipe. He says the clown couldn't have escaped that way. In the original, look, the drain pipe doesn't even go high enough. He couldn't have escaped, so it makes no sense.
Yes,
and that worried me at the time, and we didn't have time to change it. I don't know why. So 30 years later, finally I can solve it. And there are a couple of other very minor points as well. And what I wanted to show you here is that if you click on this window, for example, because it's not an essential part, we've actually, in the story mode, we've taken away the hotspot.
Okay. Yeah.
So if I now come across here, there's a second.
Ich beschließe, dass ich mich mit diesem dusseligen Regenrohr genug herumgeärgert habe.
But now we've taken away. And the reason I'm excited about this is that what I don't want in the story mode is for people to keep clicking and to get frustrated. Because, a generation ago, when this came out, people loved the fact that, there were plenty of things to do, and they loved the frustration. Here we go for a sort of fairly iconic. You may remember this.
Yeah, it was more about having an interactive world and not necessarily every hotspot, every item, everything you can look at has to do with the solution.
Well, indeed. But now, look, this one doesn't exist. So we give you plenty to interact with, but in the story mode, we then... And the reason that I'm excited to do that is because what we're doing is we're rewarding the player for exploration. Because as they explore, so the options begin to reduce, and so the player can be focused on what the solution is. Which, when we've user tested it, has gone down really, really well. Because ultimately, my argument is going to be that, as I say, the game, the interface itself is fantastic. Because it's such a simple way to communicate. And ultimately, in any game design, I think what you need is to have a simple interface, if you can, and then design the puzzles and the logic around that, which is why in this game, there really aren't any mini-games. And in many ways, mini-games are when you kind of run out of ideas of how to use the interface.
Yeah, that's the thing that's been in point-and-click games for a number of years. The reduction of things you can do as a player, like look, examine or something, coming from the LucasArts games. Clicking together sentences is fun for a while, but after a while, there's so much to click together.
Yeah.
Where do I go from here? I needed for some games in the times before the internet 3 to 4 years to finish them because I was just stumped on some stuff. There was an early puzzle in a LucasArts game. It took 2.5 years till I found someone who knew the solution.
Well, we're going to get to the goat puzzle in a minute, and that was certainly the case. You can see that, again, by having the dynamic lighting, when George walks over here, we not only does he cast a shadow, but we can light him dynamically, and we've got that light room. So, I want this to feel like a game for 2024. I don't want it to feel like just a remake. I want it to feel like it's been reinvented, but always true to the original. That's the key thing. So people who love the original game won't be disappointed.
Are you? Which platforms are you targeting? Because I think nowadays, especially for people, phones are interesting for games like this, like tapping on the hotspots and everything.
Well, the initial formats are going to be obviously PC, which will be Windows, Mac, Linux, and we will be doing, of course, a DRM-free version on GOG, or if we're doing a Kickstarter. Can I push the Kickstarter?
Of course.
Great. We're doing a Kickstarter, so if anybody has any interest, then please come along to the Kickstarter page.
Do I get a big box if I spend enough?
You do.
Okay.
Oh, yes. What we've got is we've got the digital, which has got a new film about revolution, an interactive timeline, just loads of cool things. But then we've got a box, because do you remember in the 90s when you opened a box and it was full of cool things?
Yes.
And then one day the publishers decided that it was going to go on CD and everything would be digital. And so you still sold the box, you still bought the box, but there was just a CD. And there was this incredible sense of disappointment. So in this box, not only do you have a George figurine, not only do you have a USB stick with all the sort of digital goodies, but then you also have a proper manual. A manual that actually is quite chunky, that describes, a lot of people say, where can I go to discover Broken Sword? So we'll be describing all of the locations that have some authenticity, where you can find them, what the inspiration was, kind of all the things that you want to communicate and used to be communicated. Do you remember those Microprose games?
Yes. Very big manuals.
Those manuals.
How can I start the helicopter otherwise?
They were just incredible. So I aspire to produce a manual as exciting as a Microprose manual.
So the game has to fit, of course. You don't need, I hope you don't need 400 pages for Broken Sword.
No, all you need is the ability to move the mouse around the screen. And as you can see, 2 buttons. One of the reasons that we wanted 2 animated icons is because some of the puzzles in the game do require you to examine things. And people, because they only saw, they were never given a clue that there were 2, they kind of forgot and then they'd get stuck. So let's come up here. I love this Albert character, and I'd like to show you again the difference between the old and the new. Because quite a lot of work, and sorry about the glitching, but as I say, this isn't the finished game.
It's work in progress.
So please, it is very much work in progress. But if you come here, you can see that you get the idea of the character, but there was an awful lot of work needed to reinterpret him. Sorry, let's go back to there. To interpret him, to put in the details that were missing. And as you can see, he is the same character, but now his eyes come alive, and there's a lot more effort into the animation. And the Citron, the 2CV, looks like a 2CV, whereas before it looked like some sort of hybrid of a car.
It looks a little bit different.
It does look a little bit different.
So did you have, when making the original, I would suppose you had concept art that you adapted as well as possible. It was back with the technical limitations, with the resolution down to PlayStation, down to PCs back at the time. Were you able to reference these artworks from back then in designing the newer versions?
Yes, absolutely. So tell you what, let's start a new section, and if I may, and then let me answer that question. Get rid of the subtitles. Let me take you to the right. So basically, what we had was back in the day is I was looking for animators, and Edge had run a piece about a college in Dublin called Ballyfermot, which was the feeder for layout and animation for the Don Bluth studios. And I went, and there was a gentleman there who was teaching layout called Owen Cahill. and he looked at what I was doing, which wasn't very good. And he said, "You need to employ me." And he took me to his office and he showed me his layout art, and it was absolutely beautiful. So let's try and get here because there's a nice animation here. And Owen got involved. He said, "You need to employ me." And I looked at his work and I said, "I do." And he came to work at Revolution. And what he did is he drew everything in pencil. So what we've done for a lot of these screens is we've gone back to the original pencil. We've used the original coloured as a reference and then recolored it from scratch.
Okay.
Which is why I'd like to think you've got this kind of, hopefully you'll feel that actually it fits very well because so much of it has been done from scratch.
From my point, it looks very coherent, I have to say.
Oh, great. Oh, thank you. Because what I don't want to do is sort of ruin the experience. Now, you'll remember that there's a goat here which caused a few people a bit of trouble.
Yes.
And we're about to meet the goat for the first time, which is why I want to show you this.
Triumphant goat music.
He is miserable, isn't he? He is miserable. And the reason that we're actually going to, for the story mode, we're going to change the logic because the way that it worked, actually, let's do this, is that if you come over here and try and move the plough, then the goat gets you. You may remember. So you'll go, "Okay, Mr. Goat, let's try and come down here." And the goat gets you. And so many people talk about, the difficulty of this goat puzzle. And it's not a fair puzzle, I have to say, so I'm not surprised. But I remember very well, and the way that you solve it is that you come down here, and then when you're knocked down, and you're still on the ground, you have to click there. This is not a fair puzzle. This is a bad puzzle. It's a bad puzzle because we've changed the interface and the rules of the game halfway through. But I knew that Broken Sword had reached some sort of importance because I was in a taxi in London a few years ago. And in London, the taxi drivers all talk to you. They're all Cockneys. And this guy says, I was going to see Sony, I think. He went, "Oh, what do you do? What are you doing for Sony?" I said, "Well, I write video games." He went, "Oh, I know. I love video games." And, I was sure he'd be Call of Duty or, FIFA or whatever. So when he said, "What games have you written?" I wasn't all that keen. But I said, "No, you won't have heard of it." He went, "Go on, try me. Go, "Okay." So I write a game called Broken Sword. And he looked at me and he said, "You're not the bastard that designed the goat puzzle, are you?" And I said, "I'm afraid I am." And on one hand, I'd just been insulted. But on the other, he knew Broken Sword. It was fantastic.
As you said, this is the stuff that's extra remembered. It may be a thing in retrospective, "Oh, you could have been a bit more clearer by changing the game's logic." That's the stuff you think afterwards about, "Oh, that's a point to think when we're doing something in the future." But this is, of course, especially at the time when you didn't know anyone who knew the solution. The first time you can do something in between an animation. So it could be some point where this person was stumped.
Indeed.
It's interesting that there are other games also with goat puzzles that are pretty hard. I don't know if this was then the precursor here.
Oh, so I think we came first.
I think you must have come first.
Yeah.
The other one is worse. So from the logic, I want to say, the puzzle.
With when we did our Kickstarter for Broken Sword 5, it was really lovely. A bunch of fans got together and came up with something called the Order of the Goat in recognition of this puzzle. And they invited people to pay an extra $7, $7.77. The reason it was $7.777 is that the number of the devil, 666, they said it's even worse than the number of the devil. So we're going to call it 777.
Oh, okay.
And invited people to pay an extra $7.77, so they could become members of the Order of the Goat. But what is interesting is that while the majority of our audience is male, the most passionate fans are normally women. And, and it's a huge privilege because obviously in this age where quite rightly there's this, desire for diversity, it's wonderful to see such a range of people, whether it be, from their ethnicity or their religion or their gender or whatever. This is a game, as I'm sure all adventures are, that pulls different people together.
It's a uniting factor, especially games like this. So that's absolutely the point, especially with games like this. People love solving riddles, love well-presented stories, and combining this. It doesn't matter what kind of person you are, where you come from. So there's no divider in between there. People love doing this.
And what other game could you have where you can actually talk to a goat?
Hey, Ziegenbart. Das Vieh fixiert mich mit einem bösartigen Blick. Hinter der Bosheit und der Wut ist eine kühle Intelligenz spürbar. Wie geht's denn, mein Junge? Ich fühle mich mindestens so
We're very lucky because Alexander, I want to call him Schlotti, so you'll have to forgive me for mispronouncing his name, was absolutely brilliant as well as Francesca.
So you kept, so you in being in line with being a remake, you kept the original voice acting in German?
Absolutely, and English as well. Yes, because I mean, obviously there was the temptation to re-record it, but the point is that this is the original game but better. Mm-hmm. It is better in terms of the graphics. It's better if you go into a story mode. It's more accessible. It was inconceivable. I mean, we have gone from 11 kilohertz to the full 44 kilohertz, and we've worked very hard to enhance the voices. We were lucky from the music perspective because the wonderful composer Barrington Phelan, who very sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but he had provided the music in high quality, so we're able to use that.
But you had the original recordings in 11 kilohertz, and so you had to adapt or try to enhance it as much as possible.
Yep.
So that's the thing. I appreciate that we have this original nostalgic voice acting, even if you can, of course, re-record and get new people there. It still would be something different. You can redo the graphics and many things with the interface, but the voice acting is very integral, I would say.
It is. And I think inevitably many people would be disappointed. So that was never an option. I'd like to also just, this is, I know that the game is quite long to play, but hopefully what I work very hard on is to make sure that the puzzles make sense. So in this particular case, clearly that statue, that carving has come off the wall. Mm-hmm. If you look here, you can see that there are 5 little pins. Here there are 5 little pins, but George can't lift it. He's not strong enough. So hopefully it's logical that actually having picked up some plaster of Paris, I can now come over here and I can put it on here. And also I've cheated, I'm afraid, because there's a bar towel that I can get which dries up. So we've actually set the time so it lasts for 2 hours. So basically I can do this.
Otherwise you had to get more water into it.
Exactly. I'd have to run back and then I like this because I'm very passionate about the history. This is in a place called Loch Marn in Ireland, which is based on a little village called Newcastle West in County Limerick, which is where my wife actually is from, and they have a Templar castle there. So it felt like provenance, that when we went over to Newcastle West and visited the Templar castle, that actually it should appear in the game. And of course, what game you've got to have sliding stone panels, haven't you? I mean, you just have to, otherwise it's not a sort of medieval historical game.
Yeah, that has to be a built-in feature.
It does have to be a built-in feature.
So there were a lot of stuff you could draw from your own life and put in your own impressions, like with Paris, with here.
Very much so. So Albert, and let's just watch this. This is quite good because if you compare, which I can't do, but if you actually compare the original, it doesn't actually look like George at all. And now we're able to redraw it with a proper George. And it just works so well. I'm just really, really pleased with it. And we can compare the two.
Well, where was this also time constraints back in the day to do a lot of stuff? But now you have, of course, the time and hindsight nowadays.
We have time, and also the fact that so many of the assets already exist is that it just makes it much easier. So Albert, who we saw at the end of that Paris, he was very much inspired by when I was doing research at the very beginning. I went with my wife and we stayed with we went to see a friend of hers in Paris, a friend of hers from Ireland called Martin O'Hanrahan. And he was living in an area in Paris, a gate, with a concierge. And I remember we came back quite late and we were talking gently, and the concierge came out and he was very friendly. And then when he realized I was English, suddenly his attitude changed. And so Albert is very much based on this concierge. And, the concierge talks about the English and how terrible it is when the English come over and building the Channel Tunnel and all of these things. And the reason I do
As
it is
if it's your fault. Yeah.
Exactly. But the reason I do it is because the English complain about the Channel Tunnel and all the French coming. So I'm sure the French complain about the English coming because we have, hundreds and hundreds of years, as you probably know, of fighting the French. And I love the French. But I still, even because I'm English, I have this competition.
I've seen all the Monty Python movies. I know I know very well about French and English people.
Exactly. So let me show you, if I may, a section from Syria. And the reason I want to show you this is that just to show the range of countries, the range of sceneries, the range of gameplay. In this particular case, we have solved the manuscript, and there's a place called the Bull's Head. And the original didn't actually show this scene, but I wanted to really dwell on the Bull's Head so that it was quite clear to the player that the reason it's called the Bull's Head is that you have a rock formation that looks like a bull's head. This is typical of, this hasn't been, in fact, I wish I hadn't included it. This is typical of backgrounds that haven't been fully updated. But nevertheless, I think there is this nice sense, isn't there, of a hot country and multiple layers, and you being out in the Syrian desert.
Yeah, there was if I recall, way back in the 90s when I played it, it was a nice surprise. You get to visit so many different countries. You start the game, I don't know very much about it, or it's probably just set in Paris, which is a great location. But having this variety was, of course, it's a staple of adventure games, travel here, travel there, but it was nice to see it in this fidelity back in the day.
Well, and that's great. I think that the granddaddy of all of these games is Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I think it's a superb film. But I have to say, it's kind of resonated through, because, this idea of going to all of these different exotic countries and solving part of a global conspiracy just works really, really well.
Yes. Thankfully, in most games that work like this, you don't have to pay for the airfare.
Well, exactly. Well,
there was a game where you had to pay.
Do you remember in the Dig, where you could fly off to Iceland and you hadn't got something, so you'd fly back and then you'd fly to Iceland again?
That's totally.
What I tried to do is make it such that you couldn't come to an area until you had everything that you needed.
You have it set, and then it makes sense that I can just go back to wet the towel again or something.
Exactly. Yeah, well, the wetting the towel is just 2 screens away.
Yeah, exactly. But this would be, as you said, this gating. So you have here, and you can say, okay, I'm not in kind of in a way stuck or something. Not that you would have it in a game like this, but adventure games before, you tended to get stuck.
Yeah. So going back to that, that's why. Probably I should have said also, apologies, that as well as closing in the number of permutations, we also give you a little hint after a certain amount of time as well, because with our games, we've put in a hint system. I don't want people to have to go to hints, because the moment they go to hints, they feel like they failed. You shouldn't play a game and feel like you failed. You should feel smart. So what I really want to do is I want to drive the player through this game, and they still feel smart because they're solving the puzzles. But please, if I could find a way of avoiding people getting frustrated, avoiding this, terrible thing of, okay, I'll try every combination. until eventually I stumble on the. I would hope that in a Broken Sword, a new player would come and they would never resort to doing that.
Yeah, that's the delicate balance you have to find. How do you make interesting puzzles while being still accessible, especially competing nowadays with the time of the people? There's so much other things. So if I bought an adventure game back in the day, that was the only thing I had and the only thing I could do for fun. But nowadays, I would also say I have taught myself to be a little bit more resistant and not go immediately to facts or something, or listening or reading about the solutions. But sometimes there comes a point where I say, I'm sitting here for 3 days. Either I drop it or I'm looking.
Yeah. What we did, which was interesting, you're asking about sorry, I didn't even answer your question about what formats it's going to be on. But we did some testing on the interfaces, and in particular the mobile with touchscreen. And we've got fantastic review scores on the Apple, and on iOS and on Android. I think we're 90+%. We sent it out, and we were getting 50% scores.
Okay.
And that was a real shock, because the scores that we were getting were so much lower. And obviously, our community are wonderful. They buy these games. They give us a high score if they like it. That's fantastic. But I was hugely affected by the fact that we were getting low scores and realizing that we were taking for granted that people understood how point and click work. And that's not necessarily the case. So a lot of what I'm doing now, a lot of the way that we've redone it, is a case of then sending it back out again to people. And what I'm, thrilled about is that we've gone from 50% back up to 90%. In other words, just those little tweaks. Now, it should have been obvious that that's what we needed to do, and I feel naive that we didn't do it. But it's made a big difference, and clearly those review scores that we're getting are paying dividends, because people who don't play point and click now get the game, whereas they didn't before.
Yeah, that's you can't imagine someone like me who grew up with computers. So it's like on a mobile phone, it's another format to play it, and I know how these games are playing. But many people, it's maybe the first time they're seeing a point and click game. They're not quite sure. I'm just used to putting my finger on the screen and then it explodes or anything.
Exactly. And it is quite complex, but as I say, hopefully this is more intuitive and hopefully feels a little bit more modern. And the fact that, just little things like hiding the just stuff that we didn't do because you didn't need to do it in the 90s. And, for a modern audience, you really do. So this is one of the major clues. I can't give too many spoilers, but this is one of the major clues that, will allow you to find where the secret is. And we're about to get one of the dramatic scenes, which I will leave you to, because I rather like this scene. So can we just? Yeah. Do you mind if I just keep quiet now?
Ulta, komm nicht rein, es ist eine Falle. Bleib, wo du bist. Wie?
Hallo, Mr. Stobber. Wir treffen uns aber auch immer an den ungewöhnlichsten Orten. Bitte machen Sie keine hastigen Bewegungen. Ich habe nicht den Wunsch, Sie zu verstümmeln.
Sagten Sie verstümmeln?
Genau. Tote erzählen mir ja nichts, wie Sie wissen. Und ich möchte doch alles erfahren, was Sie mir zu erzählen haben.
Und wenn ich nicht plaudern möchte?
Dann müsste ich Sie bedauernswerterweise töten. Aber seien Sie versichert, dass ich ein ausgezeichneter Schütze bin. Sie würden nicht leiden.
Das ist gut. Glauben Sie mir, mir fällt wirklich ein Stein vom Herzen.
Es ist etwas dunkel hier drin. Ich finde, wir sollten unsere Geschäfte lieber draußen abwickeln.
Warum sollte ich mich zu einer noch leichteren Zielscheibe machen?
Wenn ich auf Sie schieße, Mr. Stobbart, dann treffe ich Sie auch. Selbst hier drinnen. Unglücklicherweise leidet dann meine Zielgenauigkeit. Das könnte den Unterschied ausmachen zwischen einem Treffer ins Bein oder in den Unterleib.
Ist das plötzlich heiß hier drin.
keine plötzlichen Bewegungen, Mr. Stobbart.
There we go. Excellent. I'm going to stop it there.
It's interesting with the new, you said where it was possible to expand the framing for widescreen. So I would imagine in the original it would be more, we had a 2-shot instead of this wide.
We had 4:3. The original was 4:3. And obviously 16:9 is now more common. So where screens are where they're to the original aspect ratio, then they will have generally black bars. But where they can go wider, we will go wider.
So when you will be able in the final game to switch between the old and the new graphics, if there was a scene where it wasn't possible to expand it, or the original wasn't so expansive, so you would have black bars there.
I think you're right, but that is, that should be fine. Yeah. But that obviously means that you can do things in the new game, because you'll have hotspots that are now in the boundary, which they weren't before. But
it's always interesting. Of course, you have to adapt, and it's great that we have nowadays this wide screens with having so much space.
Yeah.
Actually, when I'm playing at the computer, I have a 21:9 monitor there for working and for playing. It's interesting to have such a wide field of view. But this, of course, artistic intention. How does it fit the framing and everything? It just makes it very different.
But the original wasn't 640/480, it was 640/400.
Oh, okay.
Because what we did was we had a little bit of the bottom of the screen and a little bit of the top of the screen. And when you played the game, you moved the cursor up.
To get the item list.
To get the item.
Yes.
So actually, we're very lucky, because by doing it again in 4K,
you get a little bit more extra.
We get a little bit more room in each direction. So actually, it gets very close to, by incredible good luck, it gets very close to the 16:9 aspect.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
I mean, we have been lucky. When we did the game on iOS for the opening for the initial iPhones, the resolution was pretty much exactly the 640/400. So it looked really, really fresh at that time. And we did Broken Swords 1 and 2 under those constraints, and then the Retina screen came in, and we were able to do Broken Sword 5, and Broken Sword 5 looked fantastic on the Retina screen, and now the iPads have huge resolutions, but we're able to come back in again and to do a 4K version. So we are extraordinarily lucky in the way that, the technology is developed. But I'll tell you, when the first game, so this BAPHOMET'S FLUCH was 1996, and in those days, retail, there was only retail, there was no digital distribution. And what would happen is that a game would go into retail, it would last, if you were lucky, 4 or 5 months, then it would go into budget at retail, and then it would disappear. And that was it. You'd have no chance. So while I kept all the physical assets, I threw away a lot of the digital assets, because I knew that we would never need to use them. Why would I bother keeping them? So when the opportunity to republish the game on iPhone came along, it just would have been unthinkable 15 years later. And what excited me on iPhone is that the average Metacritic score is 93% for a game that was 15 years old. I mean, that's insane, isn't it? And so I'm very proud of the original game. What a privilege it is to be able to upscale it, to enhance the audio, to have a story mode which has a more accessible. I'm very excited. I think it'll be. I can't wait to see what the reaction will be from fans.
Yeah, just from my reaction, yes, someone who really loves point-and-click games, and this was one of the games of my formative years, as I said. It's always great, especially Broken Sword was a special case, because you've, of course, been always added. There's been many sequels, there's been the re-releases, the redons. Was there a Broken Sword on Game Boy Advance?
There was a Game Boy.
There was something,
There was a Game Boy Advance. And,
no?
I mean, I think the team, which was led by Tony Warner and Steve Ince, did an exceptional job, because they got it down into a tiny cartridge. But to do that, they had to re-implement the game from scratch, and they left a lot of the animations and the music and hotspots. They by necessity. Now, my big mistake was when we did Director's Cut, was to use that as the base rather than coming back to the original. And fans and it's wonderful that people care enough. The fans are saying, why have you removed this content? Well, we didn't remove it. We just didn't re-implement it. So what we can do with what we are doing with this new BAPHOMET'S FLUCH is, because we're going back to the original, as I say, everything that existed in the original. But furthermore, we're actually looking for lines that were recorded and intended to be played at the time, but never were because of game logic that never triggered them. So we're looking to find those lines and to trigger them as well, so that there's original new content from the time. Nothing's been added unless it existed at the time.
I'm looking forward to seeing this in this version because it looks very appealing, I have to say. It's always great when, of course, when you're a creator, you're making games, you're making movies, you're making music. Of course, you have your own views on it and what did I want to do like this? What did I want to enhance? As you said, with the pipe, how does it fit? These are all things maybe some people think about, but you think, of course, about. And it's great to see when creators are still working on this and bringing a version to more modern times, more accessible times, that it's not just a memory for a lot of people, because once it's there in this form with the ability to switch over to the old version, so you will have the ability either to experience it new, or someone like me can experience it again. And I always like remakes and remasters, I have to say, because it's especially with not being accessible so easily with most cases, it makes it easier just to be able, I can buy this game and I can play it now.
Well, hopefully also by those continuity. I mean, may I give you one more example?
Yeah, please.
You will discover later, without wishing to have a spoiler, that the clown was Khan, who I've just shown you. And that there is a reason, which I won't go into, why he has to put makeup on so that he's not recognizable. You find the jacket that he had, which is a very distinct checkered. Then when you go to the hotel where he's staying, you see him coming and he's wearing the same checkered trousers, but he's wearing a purple jacket, and he later puts on purple trousers. Now, logically, that makes no sense because he's coming back for the first time. So why is he wearing the purple jacket? Now, players are almost certainly not going to question that, but there will be subliminally an element of doubt in their mind. So again, what the real beauty of this is the opportunity to go back and say, let's try and make sure the continuity is absolutely spot on. Not because people noticed it, but because it'll make the logic of the game and the story easier to understand.
And to play devil's advocate with this, of course, the purists who want to say, I don't want these changes, there's still the opportunity to switch back to the to see the original. Because I also understand this viewpoint.
Yeah,
because
of course.
Once you put it out there, it's not just yours anymore.
No, indeed. And I mean, again, with with our Kickstarter for Broken Sword 5, one of the young women wanted to come to drop something off, and that was very generous of her. She'd made some goats, actually. In recognition of them, And she said, and we invited her in, and it was lovely to meet her. And she said, that there's a goaters evening in York this evening. I went, what are you talking about? She said, oh no, there's about a dozen Order of the Goat people meeting in York.
Of course.
I went, really? And people had flown from around Europe to come to this thing. But it wasn't us. We hadn't organized it. In fact, we knew nothing about it. And what I love, as you've just said, is that we create this thing and then people take it on and they interpret it in their own ways. And I have the utmost respect, which is one of the reasons why I keep saying we're not changing anything unless I can stand up. I want to change the drain pipe. I want to change that. But there's always a good reason. And so hopefully purists will play, I hope, in the 4K version and understand the reasons for the minor changes that we've made. But there's nothing major, nothing significant.
You'll get plenty of feedback, I'm sure, nowadays.
Also, I ought to warn you about one thing, and that is at the ending, which I, again, won't give too much. But I was replaying that, and it feels very anticlimactic. So the point is we're not changing any of the dialogue. We're not changing any of the core story at all. But wherever I can, I am using the opportunity to punch it up slightly. So, that goat, for example, you don't get the close-up. You don't get the crash zoom. Little things like that, where all I'm trying to do is emphasize a feeling that existed in the first place. And maybe through cinematography, maybe through addressing some of the continuity errors, we can be more logical and hopefully enhance both the story and the gameplay experience.
So you said Kickstarter is running now to time, concurrently?
Kickstarter is running, and it finishes, I think, on the 26th of March. And it'll be great. I mean, I love Kickstarter because it's a terrific opportunity to engage. Can I tell you something slightly irrelevant,
Sure.
if you don't mind me saying? So when I wrote my first game in 1981, and we would produce them in cassettes and sell them to wonderful early gamers. And, it was wonderful to meet them. And I remember one young man, he brought his son and he said, I managed to convince my wife that we should buy the Sinclair ZX81. We're talking about 1981 now, or 1982.
Of course.
And I said that it was important for his education. And she believed me. Because that was always the way. I bought it for the homework.
That's what I told my grandma for the C64. Exactly. I need it for school.
Exactly. And it always worked. But he said, your spelling is so bad. And my wife was watching us play your adventure games. And when she saw how bad your spelling was, everything unraveled because she realized that it wasn't for the education at all. It was because you wanted to play games. And he said, you got me into terrible trouble. My point being that it was wonderful to meet people and hear what they loved, what they didn't love, and it helped us then change how we developed games later. And then publishers became very powerful, and then retailers became very powerful. So when Revolution started in 1990, our main client was the publisher. The publisher's client was the retailer, and the retailer dealt with the game. So we had no direct relationship with our audience. We could read magazines, which were great, and we could read letters, but broadly, we had no way of knowing what people really thought about our games. And the big move to digital that happened in 2006, 2007, really spearheaded by Apple with iTunes and then the App Store and then Steam, both of whom I think as developers we own a huge debt of gratitude to, is suddenly we were able, and social media, we were able to communicate directly with our audience. And I remember when we released Broken Sword, the first BAPHOMET'S FLUCH on iPhone in 2009, we organized, because we were working with Apple quite closely, Apple had these flagship stores, one of which was in London, was in Regent Street. I went and I asked if I could meet the manager, and the manager came, and a guy called Robin Lingwood, and I said, could we launch the game? And he said, well, yeah. He said, we've got Robbie Williams in next week. We've got the cast of the Vampire Diaries in 3 weeks. But if you can do it in 2 weeks, then you can have it.
Then it fits. Yeah.
But we were really poor. We're always poor. I mean, we're always running out of money because adventure games are expensive, and our wonderful, passionate audience is quite limited. So we're always running out of money, and that's part of the fun. But I said to him, I'm afraid, we can't pay very much. And he looked at me like I was mad. He said, we don't charge anything. And that was really interesting because it was, we then did something called the 12 Days of Christmas. We let the game go out for free, and we had 2.5 million downloads in one day. And so many people were brought to the franchise because of that. And it was quite clear at that point that everything had changed. Everything had changed with digital. And it meant that we could now communicate directly with our audience. And what happened, I remember it so well, is I was really worried nobody was going to come. And so we had the launch, and there were queues going on. It was phenomenal. People had flown from Europe. People had come. I remember this one gentleman come from Italy, and it was just wonderful to be able to talk to fans in a way that I hadn't been able to do for 20 years. And as such, we can communicate with people, and we can find out what they like and what they don't like. And it means that we can hone our games and we can change the way that we develop. It's fantastic. And that's not to say, that it's not great to work with publishers. And we do work with publishers. But the great thing about being able to do the Kickstarter is that by self-funding, it means that we keep the creative control, and we also keep the control of who we work with, because the moment somebody else funds you, they're the ones that take control.
Of course.
So that's why these changes are so fantastic.
So if you want to get the full vision out of BAPHOMET'S FLUCH, out of Broken Sword, especially with all the hindsight that's coming from almost 30 years since the first game.
Yeah, that's terrifying, isn't it?
Check out the Kickstarter. And Charles, it's been once again a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so
in
much.
Studios.
I love coming here, and please, please, please let me come back when I have our new game, because I really admire I really admire Rocket Beans, Game 2. I think you guys are brilliant.
Thank you very much. And I give the compliments to our colleagues then out there, and hopefully not in another 8 years.
No, I know.
Sometimes more soon, and hopefully we can have you back then.
Can I say Dankeschön?
Of course.
Auf Wiedersehen. It pretty much ends there, I'm afraid.
Dankeschön und auf Wiedersehen. Ja, tschüss.
Tschüss.